Welcome back to Change Ed.
Change Ed.
Change Ed. The number one educator podcast in all of
Pennsylvania.
America.
Ooh, America now.
Yeah, we're expanding it. I'm your host, Andrew Kuhn, education consultant for Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. And here with me is
Patrice Semichek, an educational consultant from the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit.
Wow, you crushed that title this time. Good
Listen,
job.
I've been practicing
Yeah,
in the
I'm
shower.
very impressed. We have here with us no stranger to all the work that has been happening in Steels with the Steel standards.
Yeah, she's killing it all over the place.
All parts. A very good friend of ours at Montgomery County, but also, again, throughout the state. Erin McCool, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
We are super glad to have you here. We know that you are going to be here with us at the Expo on April 23rd, and we would love to hear more about your special significant role that you're going to be playing with us at the Expo.
Great. Thank you. Well, as you know, I wear many hats. I'm an educational consultant. My background is mostly environmental and outdoor education, and science rolls right into that. And I'm really excited to be at the Expo presenting in my role as a consultant for Carolina Biological. I think I'm one of the luckiest people in the world because through Carolina, I'm able to travel across the whole country and talk with teachers that are doing the work, that are on the front lines doing science education. So excited to share that with you all at the Expo.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, Erin. Maybe you could let's start off by you telling us a little bit about what we could expect to hear from you or things that you're thinking about as you're getting ready for the biggest stage in the world of
bigger, better, bolder.
Yeah, the bigger, better,
Expo.
bolder stage. Yes.
The topic is like using phenomena, talking about how phenomena is all around us and it can be used for science education, bringing it down to Pennsylvania. And this is a big shift for our teachers in Pennsylvania. We're asking them to be curious and study phenomena and figure concepts out rather than what we're used to in science is like, let me tell you all about all this science and then let's go observe it.
Yeah,
right. And so we've really flipped that model, and that this sounds amazing and beautiful. I never talk to a teacher, a parent, anyone who says that sounds like a terrible idea. Why would you want to look at phenomena and real world authentic issues? We can all agree that that's really a good strategy, and that's how our students should be learning science. But we also need to recognize that it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
Like if you've not learned science this way, we're asking you to turn around and teach science this way. And we're asking students to shift the way that we're learning all at the same time. And so an important piece of this is how we're supporting teachers and students in making that shift.
But my question is along those lines, what's really interesting about what you're pointing out right now is something that we've talked about a lot, not necessarily on the podcast, but I think is definitely worthy of being mentioned on the podcast, that as educators, we have taught in a way that has been modeled for us. And very often we're inspired to get into education because of an educator who we saw teach a certain way, and we were really excited about that. In a lot of ways, also, we've seen so much of education been focused on one-dimensional learning in that knowing and memorizing category. So a lot of the teachers that we were inspired by and we were excited about were the ones that actually engaged another dimension, maybe all three or at least one. And we were like, yes, let's do that. So some of us have actually seen that modeled in certain ways, but you bring up a good point. We have not necessarily seen that modeled for us. And I'm wondering what that looks like in the work that you've been a part of. What does that look like to empower educators when they haven't necessarily seen this modeled for them?
There's many ways that this is going to happen. And I don't think there's one magic strategy that we're going to say, this is just follow this, do this one thing, and that's what's going to help you. And that's where we talk in depth about what professional learning needs to look like and what high quality instructional materials need to look like. And the professional learning piece, in particular, I do professional learning in many settings around environmental education and science education, and I've been very heavily enmeshed in Open SciEd. And that training that's been developed by Open SciEd and that we use in the Carolina platforms is very focused on, it's called curriculum-based professional learning. And so within that, what we do is we talk about what the instructional model is. We provide teachers with time to discuss with each other and to reflect on the learning. And we show models of this happening in classrooms, right? So we can't necessarily be transported into classrooms, but we do have videos that we share of classrooms where students are doing this work. We've got access to technology, so that's helpful. So being able to peer into classrooms is really helpful. And I think that that's a good start. And we also need to be thinking about how we support teachers moving forward. What opportunities are they going to have for ongoing engagement, ongoing reflection of their practices, and recognizing that if you're going to go to a professional learning, you're going to try this once or twice, and it's going to be hard at first, but it will get easier, both as you learn how to do this and you sort of learn what the pitfalls and what works well. And then also as your students start to adapt. And what I hear, and I've had this experience in outdoor ed as well, is the first time you start asking students what they think, it's a little jarring, right? What do you mean? What do I think? What do you think? What am I supposed to think?
Right.
What is the answer you're looking for me to say?
Oh, great. This teacher doesn't know. They're asking me. They have no idea. This lesson's
we've
made
actually
up.
heard that, right? Wasn't there someone we heard? He had his people come to him and say that the teachers didn't know what they were doing because they were asking more questions than stand and deliver. That's crazy.
I've definitely had that experience working with kids on field trips and outside. I have 100% had that happen to me where a group of students were like, don't you even know? Do you know? It's like, and it puts the educator in a very different role. It's one thing to confidently know your material really well. It's a whole other feeling to be working side by side with your students as a facilitator. Mm-hmm. So you have this question about how a watershed works and how does the impact of stream health, where I am here in Pennsylvania, impact things that are happening all the way in New Jersey. There's a lot to unpack there. We're going to figure that out together. I don't have to have it all memorized. I'm learning right alongside of you. I have questions too. When I'm looking at evidence, I see things that are puzzling, and let's figure it out together. And how are we going to set up our investigations to figure things out?
You know, what's also really interesting about this for me, Erin, is that while we talk about that it hasn't necessarily been modeled for educators, what's interesting is that, you know, as we think about this multidimensional learning, you can embrace that even in the styles that we learn. Not everybody learns the same way. People don't grasp information the same way. Very much in our own professional learning journey, we have tried to find ways, how can we embrace multidimensional learning in what we offer to people and how we try to support them. So that's why we have a magazine, we have a podcast, a lot of different ways that we try to get this information out. We offer in person, we offer asynchronous, because now it's all about meeting people where they are. It makes me think about if you ever went to a concert and you had to wait in line to get into the concert, there was only one way to go in. But if you needed to get out, there were exits everywhere. And then you could find a side door and you're like, oh, hey, look, this is an easier way to get in. We can get in and out this way. And I think very much that's about what learning is now. There's not only one way to get into the learning. Let's find all the different pathways, the side doors, the rear doors, the front doors that you can go and you can get into the learning, and then you have access to it. So we're not waiting in line to all go in through this one space where everybody can get in, even at the same time or at similar times, and then they all have access to it.
Sure. Yeah. And guess what? That's the way the world works. Like years ago, there was someone who put together this chart of lifelong learning, and you learn throughout your entire life, right? We know that your brain continues to learn. Even if you're in your 80s and 90s, you're still forming brain connections. And a very tiny percentage of that learning happens in a classroom. So we have students for a very small part of their learning journey. And then when they leave us, they're learning in all other different ways, as Andrew mentioned, like all of these different, through social learning, through your workplace, through Googling it, right? There's endless information available to us. So the beauty of this three-dimensional learning is we are teaching students content, but we're also teaching them how to do science, how to learn science, and how to figure things out. And that's really what is going to serve them well as they enter into a world that's facing some pretty complex challenges.
I think that's one of the great things about the shifts in instructional practices that come along with STEELS and the three-dimensional learning, because they can be applied in every single content. This kind of thinking is just that. It's thinking. It's thinking about how you think. It's metacognition. It's all of the things. And so if we can continue this conversation, I think especially for scaling things up, right? Elementary teachers, if we can start thinking this way in ELA and math and
Yes.
social studies as well, like we're thinking about our thinking and making those instructional shifts, by the time those kids get to middle school and high school, there's going to be an expectation that they're cognizant of how they're thinking. And I think it could be extremely powerful. And we're working towards shifting the way in which young people come out of school ready to interact with a world that's going to be constantly changing with the addition of AI and all of those other things. They're going to have to be deeply aware of and in touch with how they learn and think and things like that. So I think that's one of the more powerful things about these shifts in practices.
And so for our educators, there are available to them so many different dimensions of learning, but also modeling. So it's not going to look like our traditional modeling. And I think that's an important distinction to make, is that we're saying it hasn't been modeled for us. Well, you're right, it hasn't been in the traditional sense, but we're embarking on a new world and a new way of doing things where things aren't necessarily going to be modeled for us. We're having so many conversations about artificial intelligence and what that looks like, what it could look like, what it means. That's a world that has not been modeled for us. So we're embarking on this world that has not been modeled for us. What was that? What was that term? Unprecedented times. Remember that COVID? That gave me chills just saying that. Right? We're in unprecedented times where we don't have that to look at. We don't have something to say, this is what we've done before, but we can use that again as a new model to say, well, this is how we handled it before. Why do we do that? And very much in line with what we're doing with the standards of saying, okay, instead of having all these standards we're going to cover and you're just going to learn a little bit about it, let's just learn about a couple of things and know it really well. And then when you're in a scenario, you can grab from that and you can say, okay, what did I learn here? What was the process that I worked through? So in a lot of ways, we're actually modeling learning by not having a model to operate off of.
Yeah. I mean, some of the technology that we're looking at is really leapfrogging us. We're at, like you said, unprecedented times. It's like we are at a time where you're seeing just such rapid change and technological advance and things like AI coming into the picture. That's impacting schools for sure. I talk to educators all the time who are talking about how do we use this tool, and we know students are going to be using it. It changes a lot about how we teach science, because if I can type in AI and get an explanation of the content, that puts me in a very different starting point. But this is the world that they're going to live in. And the impacts of this are going to go far beyond the classroom, right? Like entire industries are rearranging around the technology that's available. And so some of the things that we are talking about in three-dimensional learning, we're not teaching we're teaching content. The content is still there, but alongside the content is what you said, like how to learn, how to do science, the science and engineering practices. There's a strong emphasis on how do we figure things out, which I think is really exciting. It's unprecedented times, but it's also exciting times.
I like too that you brought up the fact that this is not going to be an easy transition.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to continue to have that conversation and for us to be able to say, we know this is going to be work, but it's worth it. It's worth the work. And I think that's huge to acknowledge with teachers so they can recognize that, it is going to be a big shift. When we're talking to teachers, we have to acknowledge that this is not something that's going to happen overnight, and that we need to make sure that there are scaffolds and modifications in place for kids to be able to transition into this kind of learning, especially those kids that don't grow up in this way of thinking. And we, in terms of professional development and how to support our teachers, we need to have those scaffolds and modifications in place too, to help them transition into something that they're not used to teaching in that way either.
Yeah, for sure. How do we support teachers as learners? And when we do professional learning, I often will say, someone smarter than me came up with this. I don't remember who it was, but the beginner mindset, right? Like, I'm a beginner here. And so you came up with that?
No, I'm just kidding.
No, he's just
you said smarter than me. Well, it was me.
You're a beginner. So it's going to feel overwhelming. You're going to feel vulnerable. You're going to get frustrated. And how do we, as the system, support that? And so that's one of the things that I'll give a pitch to. When we think about platforms, what Carolina has done with this high quality instructional materials curriculum that OpenSite has created, now we're looking at what is the tool and the vehicle like to help support our teachers who are learning this to be able to implement this in a way that they can be successful. And to your point, Patrice, we've talked about this a couple of times. This is hard. We have to make sure that we're giving the resources for our teachers to do this work. This is not going to be, hey, let's just tweak a little things and here you go. Like we're asking really for a whole new paradigm of science education.
There's that word again.
Yeah.
Paradigm.
Paradigm.
Shifting.
The other thing I really appreciate that you've called out is that this is bigger than education. The reason that it's important, and we're talking about it now, is because of the charge that we have for empowering the next generation, for empowering and imparting knowledge on our students. But like you were pointing out, I've seen so much how what's happening now in the world, and even what we're doing with our new steel standards here in Pennsylvania, that is informing corporations, organizations, things that they're doing, how they're doing it. They're having conversations to how do we adjust. Honestly, even with our expo, there's been a lot of conversations about, well, what does that mean? And we've had conversations about what does the experience hall look like and what am I doing in that hour? So we're having these rich conversations about how where we're at now, bridging the gap, how do we get to that spot? So in so many amazing ways, these new standards go beyond education and are impacting so many of us so that we can all adjust together. The challenge, I think, for our educators is that they're on the front lines. They're right there in front and they need to be able to react to it quicker. But I think react's not the right word. It's more like we have this charge to be proactive instead of reactive to it. And so we're being proactive, but we don't know all the time what we're being proactive for. That can be the big challenge, but also this great mystery. So really for us as educators, we're going to use that word modeling again. Really what we should be modeling now is how do we model vulnerability? How do we model curiosity? How do we model authenticity through this process?
Yeah.
Right. And that shift from strict classroom management to like, let's all be curious about learning and how do we respect each other and value each other without kind of a firm hand with like I don't know what's going to happen next, but we're going to shift and we're going to evaluate. So there's a balance. I'm not saying that there's not, but I think it's important that we look to what could this be and not to write it off immediately, but to even just consider it and percolate on it.
Percolate. I love that word.
So, Erin, I know that you're a huge fan of the show. And so you know that we try to keep it to 15-ish minutes. And while we could probably record multiple podcasts with you all
For
at
a long
once.
time. Yeah.
We have to wrap it up. So we're going to give you the second to last final word on this podcast. Any thoughts? You want to tie it up, wrap it up in a bow on modeling, on vulnerability, curiosity, authenticity, supporting our learners?
I think, and knowing that this is leading into the expo and folks that are listening to this podcast are going to be coming out to the expo. And I know you've got so many different partners and vendors that are out. I would encourage you to be thinking about this. This is hard piece, right? You're going to get excited. You're going to hear about the possibilities that are how exciting three-dimensional learning is and phenomena-based learning, and really be mindful of looking for where you can support teachers and students in doing this work. And that these are really important tools. The time spent in selecting your materials and your providers and the time spent in professional learning are critical to the success that, teachers need this support in order to be successful.
Erin, we have really enjoyed having you on the show. We're excited to see you at the expo and to continue to learn more together. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And on behalf of the entire Change Ed team, thank you for tuning in. Remember to share this and all of our podcasts and subscribe.
Oh, we're doing that here now.
Yeah, just
so I don't get the last word ever again.
It felt right.
Okay.
And we want to remind you to continue forming your brain connections at the expo and find your multi-dimensional models.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
That was good.
I wrote it down.
That means it's real.